Okay, why don't we get started? And I first want to welcome everyone to our panel discussion today on the Juggling Act, Caregiving, Lawyering, and Mental Wellness. Our event is co-sponsored by the Women's Bar Association, the Massachusetts Black Women Attorneys, the National Association of Women Lawyers, and the South Asian Bar Association of Greater Boston. And thank you to our sponsors for supporting this presentation. We have an amazing panel today, and I will introduce them momentarily. First, I want to remind everybody about who Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers is and what we do. We are a nonprofit organization and provide free and confidential one-on-one consultations with licensed clinicians on mental health and substance misuse challenges. We also offer support groups and educational programming. And finally, we offer one-on-one consultations in law practice management. So a few housekeeping tips before we get started. After the discussion, we will open it up to the audience for questions and answers. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature or chat feature to ask questions. So we'll leave about 20 minutes at the end. I'm also going to include links in the chat with additional resources for you. Without further ado, I am honored to introduce our moderator for today, Leslie Ford. Leslie is the CEO and founder of Mom's Hierarchy of Needs. Her business provides evidence-based tools for moms to reclaim time from their never done less for well-being and helps employers retain caregivers. Next, our panelists. Candice Delacona is principal and shareholder in Offit's Kerman's Estates and Trust Practice and hosts the Sandwich Generation Survival Guide podcast. April English serves as the Chief Secretary to Governor Maura Healey and previously worked in the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. Amy Mariani is a mediator and helps individuals and businesses resolve their disputes through creative negotiation. And last, but certainly not least, Anat Sarat is counsel at Wolf Greenfield, where he represents companies in federal court, the International Trade Commission, and the Patent Trial and Appeal Board in IP cases. So for more detailed information about our panelists, you can certainly read them on the website. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Leslie. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I've been looking forward to this all day because I had the pleasure of meeting this incredible group and talking about this panel as we were preparing. And wow, like we have a very rich and varied set of professional experiences and caregiving experiences. One of maybe just to tee things up a little bit before I kind of start asking questions, something that we talked a little bit about and also that I discussed with Amy is that, although caregiving and career tend not to go together as smoothly as we anticipate before we start, it's dynamic, it's unpredictable. There's rarely a playbook that works for every situation. And over time, our caregiving roles tend to get more and more complex as we ascend in our careers and our work gets more and more complex. I wanted to maybe start a little bit on the professional front and how you are making space at this stage of your career because you're all incredibly accomplished leaders, you're doing incredible work, but your caregiving responsibilities have been getting a lot more complex as you've been kind of on these journeys. So maybe let's start with you, Amy, if you could share a little bit about, first of all, who you care for and how you have made adjustments in your professional life to accommodate the complexity of care.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and thank you to LCL for the invitation to join today on this really fabulous and very important topic. I have a mediation practice and balance that with caring for a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old, and also with caring for an 88-year-old mother-in-law, an 84-year-old father, and a recently passed mother who was 86 at the time of her passing in January. I also am the administrator and trustee for the estate of an aunt who passed away recently. So balancing all of those various things has been a challenge, and has been a challenge for the past 5+ years or so. And for me, the best way to tackle that is really twofold. First of all, actually threefold. First of all, I am religious about preserving my time. So I basically say, this is the time that I do this is the time that I do that. And I don't violate that except in cases of truly extreme emergency, like a hospitalization or something like that. So when I say Monday morning is for administrative work, Friday afternoon is dealing with it, estate and related issues, I stick to those 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever is blocked off on my calendar. The second thing that's really been hard for me to do is learn to say no. And I love to help people. I love to get involved in community activities, but I have learned that I have to be very selective about what boards I agree to serve on, what kinds of occupations I choose to engage in. So I've really had to dial back on a lot of the stuff that I did, both personally and professionally, for marketing and all of that. I've really paid attention to where do I make the most impact and what makes the most impact on me. And last but not least, I religiously block out time for myself at the beginning and at the end of every day. So in the morning, that is typically sitting down for 15 minutes with a cup of tea, doing a Wordle, or something that's distracting and sets me up in a positive mood for the day. At the end of the day, part of my bedtime ritual, and I highly recommend coming up with a bedtime ritual, I read a chapter or 2 or 3, depending on how good the book is, before I go to sleep. I also try to make time for exercise as much as possible. And that could be a simple walk around the block in the middle of the day when necessary. Hopefully it's a longer walk with my husband, so I'm also building time in to establish and sustain that relationship as well.
Oh, I love everything about that. And I'm going to ask each of you this question. And Anand, I'd love to hear from you as well. First of all, who you care for, and then you are in a different type of legal setting. You're in a larger firm, if I remember correctly. So I'd love to hear, how have you adapted your career, especially at this stage in your leadership journey, to navigate all of the dynamics of care?
Sure. So again, thanks to all of you for coming. So I care for my 2 children. I have twins. They're almost 11. I live with them here in Newton, and I'm starting, as my parents are getting older, to kind of care more for my parents who live in Sudbury. So far they're fairly independent, but kind of as the years go on, I've had to kind of care for them more and more. I would say, in terms of how I have adapted my practice over the years, I think I've been fortunate in that within the sort of general umbrella of what I do, which is kind of IP litigation, basically in various forums, both in federal court and in the patent office. Within that kind of general umbrella, I've been kind of fortunate that there's kinds of lots of different types of work that I can do with sort of different kind of day-to-day workflows. So over the course of my career, I've moved away from doing kind of traditional in-court litigation and some of the kind of schedule unpredictability that comes with it, and switched over to doing what I do primarily now, which is what's called post-grant practice work. So basically, I'm kind of doing most of my work on paper with the patent office, writing things, responding to briefs, that sort of thing. So that's been very, very helpful for me in the sense that I have fewer instances where I kind of need to be in the office at a particular time, or need to be in court, or need to be at a deposition at a particular time. It certainly comes up every now and then, but compared to the traditional litigation practice I had before, it's certainly a lot less. And so I would say there's kind of good and bad things about that. I mean, Amy was talking a lot about wanting to be able to block off certain times during the day or during the week, to do things outside of work. I actually find that my strategy has been a bit different in the sense that I'm not necessarily always able to predict when I can block things off for work versus block things off for personal stuff. But the nice thing about my practice is that I sort of know in the aggregate that if something comes up and I need to leave the office during the day to go deal with, picking up the kids from school or something like that, because the type of work I do is sort of more kind of research and writing based, I know I can kind of make it up in the evenings. So, like I was saying, there's a plus and minus to that. I don't have kind of as much kind of strict separation over the course of my day between work time and non-work time as I might like. But that flexibility about when I'm working during the day is kind of very important given my childcare responsibilities.
That's fantastic. I will ask one quick question on that before I move to Candace. Did you get any pushback when you kind of shifted your practice and had to have some conversations with colleagues or with partners about making this shift?
It's an interesting question. The way I kind of did that switch was to move from a very, very big law firm to a mid-sized law firm. So the pushback I got was the partners of the big law firm not wanting me to go. But kind of once I got to the new place, everyone was fine with the schedule that I have.
That's great. That's super helpful. Hello, Candace. I'm going to ask you the same question, and please start with who you care for. But how have you adjusted, adapted, massaged your career in light of all of the great work that you're doing to navigate the dynamics of care?
So I am the parent of 3 teenagers, 15, 17, 19, a recently deceased father, where I was a long distance caregiver, which involved me flying back and forth down to Atlanta from New York City, and an in-person caregiver for my late uncle who resided here in New York City. So it's been a journey, we'll put it that way. I think your question is a really good one, and Amy and Anat, we all have sort of like this common thread. One of the things that Anat said that I have, did as well was, I was in big law. I sort of made this decision that when I became a parent, that wasn't going to be conducive to what I saw my life as being. So I made some career choices based on that. But I will say that the other thing I did was I established boundaries and made sure that my kids knew that our family came first. And I also shared with clients, which I think is a really sort of important thing to be, obviously you don't have to tell them everything that's going on in your life, but, often when you're dealing with, instead of, business to business, if you're more of a client facing attorney, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying to a client, I'll have to get back to you tomorrow. I'm hopping a flight to Atlanta to see my dad. He's not doing well. I think we underestimate the patience and the latitude that many of our clients will give to us, because it often will make them reassess how urgent their matter is. So I think communication is great with clients and your employers. And then from my perspective, I'm actually the practice group leader for our practice group. And I've really tried to set the stage, to Anand's point about, really doing the work when it suits you, as long as, we're properly representing our client. I have young parents within my purview, and I want them to enjoy the time that they have. And so if that means that they're logging on at 5 a.m. and logging off by 3:30, or conversely, they're doing work at night, I say more power to you. And I think COVID has sort of allowed our society to reassess like the need for in-person. So I really encourage people to really think about those times where maybe you could be more productive than the traditional hours, so you're not missing out on having dinner with your young kids. Or, if you have to run a parent to a doctor's appointment in the middle of the day.
That's fantastic. And I agree with you. I feel like we've had a sea change in acceptance of remote, acceptance of hybrid, and depending on the nature of the environment you're in, there's perhaps more wiggle room. But as I shift to you, April, because I think you're a really interesting contrast. You are working, all of you work in big jobs. You are working in government, and where there are real emergencies and things that cannot be moved. And I think as a whole, the profession tends to be very perfectionistic. There tends to be high degrees of penalty for not meeting deadlines. There tend to be very strict billable hours targets in certain settings. But how have you navigated working in a government setting where there's a lot of real emergency work in addition to all the things that you're navigating as a caregiver? And please introduce who you care for as well.
Sure. So as was stated, I'm April English. I am the Chief Secretary of Appointments to Governor Maurice Healey. A lot of people don't know what that means, and so I like to explain to people. I oversee the appointments to over 700 plus boards and commissions, as well as 3,300 managerial positions throughout the administration, i.e. jobs. So let me back up a second. You first were talking about hybrid and being able to be remote. I am in the office Monday through Friday, all day, every day. And that is government at work. That is the governor's office. And we're here to serve. So I was fortunate that when I had my son, who is currently 25 years old, still very close to me. What I have learned is that you never stop being a parent, which I should have learned because my mother never stopped being a parent to me. I was always one of her kids, right? And so it never stops. So that's one thing that I have learned with being a mother. I had my son my second year of law school. I was a single mom after about a year when he turned 1. And that was a challenge in and of itself, which it was at that time, I just didn't think I was going to make it. I didn't think I was going to make it through. I didn't think I was going to make it through law school. I remember a funny story. My mom, before I told her I was pregnant, I was like in tears in my room. And she finally was like, "What is wrong with you?" And I said, I'm pregnant, Mom. She was like, okay. And I was like, okay, oh my gosh, I'm in law school, I'm this, that, the other. And she was like, so just so we're clear, you're grown and you'll figure this out. We will figure this out. And then my mom did the best thing she could have ever done for me. She retired when my son was born. And so we had a 3-family home. I lived on the first floor. And my mom lived on the second floor, but for a couple of years, I lived with my mom before I moved in on the first floor. But I called her my live-in, basically, caretaker. But it was still challenging because there was the guilt trip of not wanting to put too much on her with my child, but also realizing there was no way I would be able to finish law school and start a career in law without really heavily leaning on her. And I'm happy to say that I can now look back to when I was in law school with a baby who, let's be clear, was it with me every single day because for me, breastfeeding, I could not pump. So my child had to go everywhere with me. So that meant to school with me. And one of my classmates would sit in a room next to my classes with my baby. And I would just wait until he cried and I would go and feed. She would go into my class and she would take notes. But for her and my mom, I would not have graduated on time. I probably may not have even been sitting here with you right now to even talk about this and the ability to have a successful career that I've had 23 years in government. And one of my law school friends at the time also said, just think about it. It's rough now, but by the time you're the age that I am, uh, you'll have a grown up and you'll be able to do more things, right? Which is valid. However, I'm still caring for my son, who is a member of the LGBT plus community. And some members of that community go through several surgeries. And so there's still that part that I'm nurturing, being very supportive of, being very caring, being very protective of. And then you add on the element when my mother was alive, that she ended up with dementia. So she had dementia for some time, a few years, I would say from maybe 2016 until she passed 4 years ago. And again, she lived on the second floor, so she was right above us. And so that care it was a constant. And so again, by that time though, now, so it balances itself out, right? When my child was young, there was my mama. Now my mama is older and dealing with this illness. And then there's my son able to help, which is pretty powerful to watch. And then of course I'm in the middle of all that, trying to juggle both of them, and then my professional care and my health and well-being, and making sure that I'm good in order to be good for those that I care for.
Absolutely. Oh, so much good stuff in there. Guys, I told you this was going to be juicy, right? Because I think you touched on some really important themes. Being able to be the recipient of care and accept care, I think, is part of the caregiving journey, because we all need to be replenished and refilled as we are pouring so much into the people that we love and that we're responsible for. And also that many of us are sandwiched caregivers, caring for children, caring for aging parents, or caring for other adults. I was recently conducting an employee session for one of my clients, and some younger women early in their career approached me after the session, and one was caring for a sibling who had a mental health condition, and another was caring for a family member who had a substance use disorder. So these were not people that you would look at and think that they had caregiving responsibilities because they were so early in their career, but a lot of the topics resonated because they felt like they were in these, and they were in these caregiving roles. So I feel like it can be very, very fluid, as many of you have shared, and as April described, weaving in and out of caring for others, receiving care, and then having to navigate change, especially in your case, starting in law school. It's something, Anant, just while we're still on the career theme, because I'm going to flip into sandwich generation and multi-generational care, because I know that's a hot topic as well, and something we've all been affected by. But thinking a little bit about your professional journey, and that, April started early, caring for a child in law school and kind of navigating her career. You made shifts, Candace and Amy made shifts after entering your legal career to accommodate parenting and later elder care and adult caregiving. How are you supporting your teams as a leader, knowing that many folks are going to become caregivers, may not have those responsibilities yet, and they may not see how dynamic it can be? We talked a little bit during our prep call about just that there's so many plot twists in life that we don't expect, especially as caregivers. And how do you create the space among your teams and your colleagues so that they have the signal from you that it's okay when they have a caregiving need in their lives?
So I think a lot of it kind of comes down to something very similar to what Candace was talking about, which is just, kind of making sure it's clear that I am open to people having to step away from the office or, do things on a different schedule. I'll admit I'm not perfect about it, but I try to make sure that I always kind of ask people, how they're doing. I try to make sure that if I send an assignment to one of my more junior colleagues, I try to be upfront, like, if it's not urgent, I will tell them this is not urgent. You can get it done, whenever you have time, that kind of thing. So I try to, I also try to sort of be very, very honest with all of my colleagues, both the more senior and the more junior, that like all of us were saying, I do have caregiving responsibilities, and sometimes, that's going to come in the way, of work. And what I found, and I think this may be a situation kind of where sort of gender plays a role. I mean, definitely much earlier in my career, I felt a lot more uncomfortable as the man and as the father, like leaving the office and going to kind of, have to pick up the kids from work or that sort of thing. Oh, sorry, from school. I mean, I think that's definitely gotten better over the course of my career, and I've seen it's become more normalized for men or fathers to take on some of these caregiving responsibilities, or just like leave the office. One other thing that I have found that's been very, very helpful is that a lot of my clients now are very good about being open about their childcare responsibilities, and so that kind of sets the tone for the entire case. I mean, I do patent litigation work, so I do a lot of work for big kind of tech companies with sort of very, very grueling schedules. But a lot of the in-house counsel I work with, they are very, very clear. Like, if they have to skip a meeting because of a childcare thing, they will say so. I have, a client at one big tech company who used to do meetings sometimes from the parking lot of his son's soccer practice. And I think having the client set the tone that that's okay makes it easier for us as outside counsel to set the tone for our teams that that's okay.
That's wonderful. And I appreciate you raising the gender divide, right? Because that does still exist in a lot of organizations. As you mentioned, it's improving. I will often hear from dads that they sometimes will have friction with colleagues or with managers who have different caregiving setups, and they might have a stay-at-home partner who is handling the majority of the care, and they have difficulty, getting the same grace or having flexibility when they need it. Something that I want to touch on before we move into care, just kind of one more concept around the work and creating the flexibility for work. Have you ever been in a position, and I'm kind of opening this up to all of you, where you really met with some, shall we say, resistance to having the flexibility that you needed as a caregiver, especially when you might have been at a different stage in your career? You're all in leadership now. And if you kind of met with that resistance, do you have some advice for those who are watching and listening to us right now? Because if you don't have that kind of understanding manager or a psychologically safe culture, it is a really different type of day when you are like fearing that you're going to have something blow up, right, with your child care or your elder care, and you feel reluctant to raise your hands and share that you're struggling. So I'd love to hear how, if any of you have experienced that, advice on how to navigate that type of friction that still exists for many in the workplace.
So I'm going to answer that, but I also want to piggyback on the last question you had about the flexibility that you allow for your team. And something someone said to me, I really hope it wasn't us in this conversation and I'm not quoting you correctly, but someone said to me, how you lead is how you judge. And I would flip it and say, how you judge is how you lead, right? And so in terms of my team, I'm very flexible. I remember having a hard rule when I started my legal career and I still had a young child, that if you requested me after 5, my child was coming with me. And she knew that. And so that was my hard rule. If you want me, you're going to have to get him as well. Um, I'm not sure I was ever met with resistance. I do remember an experience where um, uh, my one of my managers was interested in a leadership program to put me in. And they stated, you know, we're interested in this leadership program for you. We think it would be great for you, but you are a single mom. Like, can you do it? And that was bad. Okay. You should not state things like that at all. And I know it was not right. I know it was not ill intent. I know it was concern. Um, and they wanted me, they very much desired that I would be a part of this a leadership program and to provide me this opportunity. But when I heard that piece, right, and this might be kind of the Aries in me, I was like, I'm gonna do it, right? Um, I'll figure it out, right? And I'm glad I did, because that program I credit for the positions that I've had in leadership. But for that program, I'm not sure I would be sitting in front of you all today in the position that I'm in. But the way it was delivered to me, I think, was not with the best understanding of how bad that sounded, even with the intention of it not sounding bad or being bad.
I love that. Well, and I think there's so many good pieces in there, and just piggybacking on what you've all shared, if you have an opportunity and it feels like you have that, to your point, whether it's your inner Aries, your inner spirit, you're like, I'm going for it. This is it's on, right? If you feel that, then look at how you can realign your support, right? How can you be cared for more by the people in your life who have capacity for that? How can you line up childcare, elder care? Ask about benefits that might be available to you from your employer that might support, or whether it's supporting cost or supporting curation or complexity to make it easier. And navigating hours and expectations and flexibility, and having those conversations, ideally from a place of strength, and within a psychologically safe space. And I think there are absolutely ways to keep growing and keep building upon your career, even as a caregiver, but it requires some adjustments to make it all work. You know, something that I want to transition into, and I think you used the G word, April, earlier, and I'm going to ask all of you about guilt, because we know that is that is sadly, right? I'm a mom, I'm a child of aging parents that I share responsibilities for. I have all types of care responsibilities. It's just in there. You know, whether it's on the professional side and feeling like we may not be delivering everything that we had anticipated we would deliver, whether it's personally and feeling like we are letting ourselves down and not giving ourselves the care that we had anticipated or desired, or interpersonally, right? If you are partnered and have the need to pull back from activities you would normally engage in with your partner and spend more time on caregiving or more time on work. And then, of course, depending on the age, independence, health of your kids, having conversations with your kids about what you can and can't do can also feel really difficult. So let's talk guilt, right? Let's put that elephant out into the room. You know, Candace, when you have had to navigate guilt, how have you managed through it? What has been particularly helpful for you to kind of just not push aside, but kind of honor that feeling and find a path forward from it?
I have a couple of things on guilt. So, you know, being raised Roman Catholic, it's sort of like, you know, in you already, as you point out, Leslie, right? So, as a mother, as, you know, a daughter, as the wife, and, you know, all of the stuff that goes along with it, I think it's sort of a natural extension of what our role is. But I will say this. I spoke a lot to girlfriends and other friends sort of in the same situation, to share sort of like the fear of feeling like I'm not being a present mother or a good daughter. And, you know, for those of you in the audience that are thinking about guilt and thinking like, you know, I should be able to do X and Y with my kids, I'll tell you a really quick anecdote. One of the things that we had to deal with was dinner time. My husband and I both work in the city, and we're rushing home and rides and making sure that, you know, our family member in the city is cared for, et cetera, et cetera. And so we started ordering meal kits, and we encouraged our kids to learn how to cook. And I had a lot of guilt around me not being the person to present them with, you know, healthy meals every single night. And now I have 3 teenagers who are amazing cooks. They enjoy it and they're empowered by it. Thanks for that, April. So, you know, all of these things that could feel terrible, like we're failing, can actually turn around to be the biggest blessing that you really don't anticipate. So hopefully that's helpful to someone out there listening.
I love that. How about you, Amy? I know you've dealt with guilt before. We all have.
Oh, yes. And the biggest thing that I would say jumps right onto what Candace was saying. First of all, find people you can talk to. Whatever the support network happens to be, whether that's other family members, whether that's close friends, whether that's a group of professionals that are in similar situations. I'm in a networking group, and I was having a meeting with somebody, and we both discovered we were in this sandwich generation. And from that has spawned an offshoot of this networking group devoted to talking about the issues around being in the sandwich generation. Those meetings were a godsend during the worst of my mom's dementia, because it was in the height of the pandemic, and everybody was talking about all of the same kinds of issues. How do you find care during the pandemic? How do you make sure your parents are safe during the pandemic? All of those kinds of things. So find your people, find those core groups that you can vent to, because you have to do that. And it's not healthy to keep all of that emotion and that guilt inside. You need to be able to talk about it. And the second is to develop some self-acceptance around it, to say, look, there's one of me. My parents are in Rhode Island. They're an hour away. I cannot physically be there every day. This is what I can do. This is the most and the best that I can do. And let me see what I can devise around these issues to fill in the gaps when I can't personally be there. I don't have to be the one who does the grocery shopping. If I find somebody who can do the grocery shopping, or I can get groceries delivered, I don't have to be the person who takes them to doctor's appointments if I find a way to get them to the doctor's appointments safely. There are ways of looking at things that take some of that personal responsibility off, while still making sure that parents and other loved ones are cared for well.
I love
Can I
that.
chime in?
Yes, please.
Because we talked about having our people, and my village is just out of control. It's just an amazing village. And I've been blessed. And one of my villagers is on this call, Charu. And I haven't known her for a long time. I met her a few years back. We were on Zoom meetings together on some committee that we're on together. When you come off Zoom, people are different. You think they're 7 feet tall, they're about 2 feet tall, right? Or the opposite, right? And so we were at a gathering, and I was like, your face looks so familiar. She was like, yours too. And we finally realized how we knew each other from these calls. And then I saw her at another event, and we kind of talked a little bit more. I got to know her a little bit more. and my son was going to an event down on the Cape. And she was like, oh my goodness, you should come and stay with me. Just out of the blue, right? Knew her through a couple of introductions. And so we went, we had a great time. And so now fast forward to last year when I started this job, January 5th of 2024. And my son drops on me 3 weeks in, oh, I'm going to have this massive surgery next month. How, and I'm thinking to myself, what is the recovery time? It's like 4 to 6 weeks. What, right? So I'm trying to figure out, I just started a new job. How do I manage this, right? And so I called on my village, and Sharu was one of my villagers. And I don't even think Sharu came over because I had to go to work. I think she came over because I need to go get my nails done, right? Because you have to still make time for you. And that was embedded in my schedule. And she came over and sat with my son for hours, brought food, groceries, all types of stuff. And that took the guilt off of me for wanting to not go to work, but just needed free time, me time, take care of me time. And she stepped in and was like, I got you. And must have visited a few times. They're friends, they talk, I talk with her, right? And you build that village, you build that community of supporters who, whatever you need, and that's what I have always built. Whatever you need, they got you. And I can remember being in law school and with my baby. At this point, he was about 7 years old, and most of my friends were used to, right? I was the only one with the child. I was the only one with the child. And we had a death in the family, and everyone was going. So I had nobody to take care of my son. And so I called one of my friends, and he was like, oh my goodness, I can't make it to your house. But if you could put your 7-year-old in a cab and send them across the city. And I was like, what? No, I cannot do that. And he was like, oh my God, I'm not even putting this into perspective for you. That sounds horrifying. Nope, don't do that. I will figure it out, and I will come there and take care of your kid. But the people, right? The people who love you, who really love you, are going to take care of you. How? Exactly how you take care of others.
I love that. Anand, guilt?
So I mean, I think one thing that's helpful, although I know it's kind of hard mentally to try to deal with the guilt when it comes up, is to just try to kind of remember sort of who are the people you're caring for that you're doing this for. So if you feel guilty, as I'm sure all of us who are caretakers have from time to time, if we feel guilty that we're not spending enough time because of work, I mean that's not a great feeling, but I think it helps to remember it's like, if you're if you're someone who's working because you need to earn money to provide for your family, right? Then like that kind of helps with the guilt, right? Sometimes we do have to spend less time than we would like to sort of, with our family because we have to go out and provide for them. And I think, if you can keep that in mind, that can help deal, that can help deal with the guilt to some extent. It's funny, I think, I think it was Candace, you were kind of talking about sort of the cultural aspect. I was actually just talking about the same topic at the South Asian Bar Association conference last week. And to me, as a South Asian, and particularly as a male, I felt a lot of guilt when I left big law to go to a medium, to a mid-sized firm, because the kind of cultural expectation was you can't leave money on the table. Like that's your job as a man and as a father. So I kind of felt guilt that way. So I've sort of felt the guilt at various times in my career, kind of coming from both sides of that work-life balance scale. And so for me, again, like I was saying, what's been very, very helpful is to sort of try to remember, why I'm doing this. Okay, I'm leaving the higher paced job to spend more time with my family. I'm doing it for them. And then sometimes even at this job with a better work-life balance, sometimes I have to work late. I think to myself, I'm doing it for them, and that it doesn't always help 100%, but it helps a lot.
I just want to go back to two things, Leslie, before we move on, just based on what everybody's said. I think one of the things that I confused with guilt often was control. And Amy brought up like the grocery shopping and things like, we do it best, or, we handle these things best for our children or for our loved ones. Sometimes it's not really guilt, it's more about control and feeling like it has to be done in a certain way. And then the second thing I'll say, as it relates to guilt, is that you're modeling for your children how you care for your parents or how you care for someone that you love. And, sometimes it's not a terrible thing to say to your kid, look, you're not the center of the universe all the time. I adore you. You're hugely important in my life. And, but I also have other kids. I have a mom who I love and the way that you love me. And I think sometimes it gives the loved ones perspective around you so that they manage their expectations and maybe they'll step up a little. So.
Oh, I think that is such a good point. Absolutely. And maybe let me do a little bit of guilt busting as we transition into the next set of topics, because this is a hard time to be a caregiver, a really hard time to be a caregiver. It's always been hard to integrate work and life and care, but the past 4 years have changed a lot. As I think many of you know, I research work-life wellness and stress for parents. And I do this inside of organizations, but I also do it more broadly. So in my big study, over 3,700 parents have participated since March of 2020. It is an overwhelmingly female sample. I'm going to just kind of caveat that. And about 20% are also family caregivers caring for an adult. But 87% said they've had to dial back their career ambitions a lot or somewhat due to caregiving. Over self-care, it's now trending at 79% say that they are doing terribly or not as well as usual as they did pre-pandemic. And people might be wondering, why is that, right? And maybe in this crowd, not, because we're all caregiving, but the infrastructure that supports caregiving was decimated in the past 4 years. The healthcare system has been undermined. The fragile childcare and elder care industries were further undermined in the past 4 years. For those with school-age children, schools and education has been undermined in the past 4 years. So a lot of that kind of infrastructure underneath the village doesn't exist in the same way anymore. So we have to remember that. And if you have a combination of paid and unpaid members of your village, right, you've probably had to readjust, reevaluate, rethink, piece together different options. And then if suddenly you have a parent with dementia, my mother has early stage dementia, my dad has Parkinson's. If you're dealing with parents with cognitive decline or cognitive difficulties, suddenly you don't know what's going to happen next, right? If you're blessed with healthy children, it's pretty predictable. If you have adults you care for, it can be pretty unpredictable. So all of that is kind of happening in the backdrop. So I think it's a segue as we just kind of talk a little bit about the demands of caregiving, how to navigate some of those nuances, especially in building your village and looking for the right support, and caring for ourselves, which becomes harder and harder to do with all of these things in the backdrop. So I thought one thing that has come up in our prep call that I thought was pretty important, that in addition to the care that you're giving to your families, all of you, as legal professionals, you also from time to time get pulled into providing legal support to your families and legal care for your families, right? And then there's this blurry line between whether it's something that is directly in your discipline, something that may be outside of your discipline, whether you see discrimination or injustice and you feel called to jump in. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that for each one of you, because you've all been pulled into that in different ways. When you're being asked to apply your legal skills to your family's needs or friends' needs. When is that line? When do you say no? Under what conditions do you feel comfortable saying no? And whether it's because of what they're asking you to do or because of your capacity, how have you handled that conversation? What guidance can you give to others? Because I'm sure on this call, probably everyone on this call who is a lawyer has been asked to do similar things. I'll start with you.
I've
Oh, go
learned a
ahead.
new skill. I've learned a new skill, and it's based off of all the people I know. I know so many people, right? And so now what I do, and my family doesn't even realize it. What did you say? What's your issue? Oh, you know who you can call? That's what I do. That is my new thing. And it is a blessing that I wish I had picked up a long time ago. So I do that. When my mom passed, I am the youngest of 6. I'm the only lawyer. The first one who went to college and graduated from college as well. And so my mom didn't have a will. And so I took on the responsibility of probating the estate, becoming the executor. And the challenge with that was, and I didn't know this, I wish someone had told me this, right? So this is being the lawyer for your deceased parents' estate, right? Number one, if you are not an estate attorney, the best way to feel as if your law degree means absolutely nothing is to then try to do the estate work yourself, 100%. Took me 5 tries, and I actually worked with a lawyer friend of mine. It took me 5 tries to get the thing filed correctly. And on that last try, I found myself in my car in the parking lot of probate and family court in tears, because what no one informed me of or warned me of is that by doing the estate work and filing the papers, you're reliving your parents' death. And so I ended up in the parking lot by myself in tears in the car, as if I was literally at her funeral again. And so that was very hard. My son knows who I am as a person, and if I hear injustice, I run to it to help. And he'll call me to run to it to help. And he's probably the only one that I don't say, you know what? If you call so-and-so, that's fine. And so it is hard for me to run from injustice or pass it on, because the injustices that we are living right now are so grand. They're so hurtful. They're so, excuse my language, ass backwards. And so I had always said to myself, who would I be in the moment of the civil rights movement? And so that's how I show up when I'm dealing with inequities. So inequities, I'm running to it to help as much as I can. Other stuff, your car, even identity fraud, I can find you someone to talk to.
I second the have the big network and utilize it liberally for 2 reasons. First of all, I don't have the bandwidth to triage every legal question that comes in. Secondly, I'm committing malpractice if I try to do some of the stuff that people are asking me to do. It's not right for me to take on something that's way outside of my subject matter expertise. If you have a dispute that needs to be mediated and it doesn't involve me immediately or a conflict of interest, I'm more than happy to help you out. But if you have a probate and estate issue, if you have, any kind of divorce matter, I'm not your person. I'm going to put you in touch with somebody who is within your price range. I'm going to find you the right legal service if you don't have, if you're dependent on on someone else for your resources and need some help in navigating a situation like that. So I think it's very important to set firm limits on what you do and for whom you do it. Like April, if it's my parents or my sister or my kids or my husband, I'm probably going to step into the breach, particularly when there's an issue of inequity or injustice. But if it's a basic legal need that is just as well served by someone else, I'm going to direct you to the right resource.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to second also just kind of having a good network and knowing who to talk to. I'm a patent lawyer. I am entirely useless in basically any real world situation that would ever come up, and have been my entire career. And it's actually very funny because my wife's physician, she's an endocrinologist. If people call, if people in the family have medical questions, she kind of has enough knowledge from medical school to like know about other things outside her field to try to help them. I've had friends who've called me and said, like, well, what do I do about a speeding ticket? I'm like, A, to Amy's point, I probably can't help you as a matter of ethics. And B, I don't actually know anything. So I have to, call somebody else. And so to me, having the network that I've developed through kind of my through my colleagues at work, but also my involvement in kind of various bar associations is how I help people when somebody comes to me with a legal question.
That's wonderful. Candace?
I would just say, what everyone sort of said in the vernacular here in New York, we would say, I got a guy. So, if anyone says, they're having a boundary dispute with their neighbor, don't worry, I got a guy. It gets me out of it. And, people love to be helped. And then you're referring someone, which is a nice, sort of side effect. And then Anant, I'm sorry to put your wife on the spot like this, but what I often say too, when people are like, well, can you just write a letter and like, on letterhead, where I'm thinking, are you crazy? But I will say that I often use the term, I say, if you broke a bone, would you go to a cardiologist? No, you go to an orthopedist. I'm the orthopedist. I'm not the cardiologist. And usually people get that. So I will say that quite a bit. And also, the other part that's good for me is that I'm at a firm and I'm like, I don't hold my license. My firm holds my license. I really wish that I could help you, which is actually true. And then there are issues that are horrible and pull at your heartstrings. And like, April, and Amy talking about injustices, we all, feel that so deeply in different areas, right? We'd be doing that whether or not we are lawyers, let's be honest. So that piece is probably never going away. And maybe that's part of being, the fabric of humanity. So, but the legal stuff, I got a guy, just remember that. And the doctor analogy seems to work well.
I love that. And I know that, well, in the next like 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to transition into Q&A. But before we do that, while we're talking about I got a guy, and I know that Candace, you are an estate attorney, correct? So just because this one is a big one and it comes up a lot,
Yeah.
even before you refer someone to the right person with that specialty, how can people just get their house in order a little bit as it relates to paperwork?
Yeah.
Or even having the conversations that lead in the right direction?
One of the things that I say to my clients and that I really put into practice when I was in the thick of it, and I'm embarrassed to say I didn't put it into practice right away, I realized how hard it was, is that getting your documents in order is a measure of self-care. And getting the documents for your loved one is a matter of advocacy, right? So anytime you talk about getting documents together, it does feel funny because maybe you're overstepping, or maybe, mom or dad has been diagnosed with memory impairment and nobody wants to draw attention to that and you want to pretend like everything is okay, but the stakes are so high. So what I would say to everybody, regardless of your age, is that for you yourself, you absolutely need advance directives for your health, so someone can speak on your behalf, and you need an advance directive for your money, your worldly goods, power of attorney, because without those two documents, no one can help you. And if no one can help you, they have to petition the court for guardianship. We all know what that looks like. Look at Britney Spears, right? There are so many cautionary tales of sort of what's gone on. I will tell you too that it doesn't have to be prohibitively expensive. right? So you don't have to go to Skadden Arps to get your estate plan done. You can go to a local lawyer who knows if it's for your parents, something about elder law. There's a really easy way to look us all up, as everybody knows. And conversely, the documents can always be modified, updated, and make sure that they comply with state law. So even if you move, you can make sure to have those documents updated. Without those documents, guys, I'm telling you, the delays, the hardships that occur from not having your house in order, exponential. So have the uncomfortable conversation is my advice.
I love that. Wise guidance from all of you, which of course does not surprise me because I knew you guys are brilliant. So as we transition a little bit into self-care before we move into Q&A, and I know we've touched on it in lots of different ways, but I think this is the critical piece, right? Because when you're caring for others, it almost feels instinctive to put your own needs further and further back, right? Especially if you're caring for somebody who's vulnerable, like a child or an elder or somebody who has, compromised medical condition. So when you are in that place where you are not doing well, whether that is physically, whether that is mentally or emotionally, but you're not doing well. You're depleted. You need to hit the pause button. And it's difficult to do, right? Because it's not really rewarded in our society to say no. It's not really rewarded at work to push back on things. It just isn't. So I'd love to hear, to the extent you feel comfortable sharing, how have you been able to hit the pause button? What steps have you put in place or supports to allow you to care for yourself when you really needed it, and make adjustments if you needed to make adjustments in your caregiving responsibilities or work responsibilities?
I think that's the $1 million question, as they say. And I think it's even harder for professionals like lawyers to admit that they need help and that admit that they need time to themselves. So that, I think, is the first step, is to admit that you have to do something differently and that you have to make a change. For me, that change involved two things. First of all, being able to ask others and make myself vulnerable in that way, so that people close to me didn't look at me as somebody who's a superwoman and can do it all on my own. To, say to my husband, hey, I can't do this. Can you do this? Because, I know I've taken care of this for the first 17 years of our marriage, but I don't have the bandwidth right now. Could you please do this? And as Candace was saying, do things like ask my children to assume more responsibility for themselves. The next thing is locating and recruiting those professional resources that are going to help you build back time into your life for yourself. So, somebody like a geriatric or senior care manager, people like that are godsends, because all that time that I used to spend looking up information about who is a great resource to do this, or what's the best adult daycare center in my area for geriatric patients or whatever, they have all of that information at their fingertips. And those resources are available both both privately and through what are known as ASAPs, basically area access points for geriatric and other care. You can find, and some of those resources are actually put into the chat by Amy Levine. You can locate someone who can help you out and help plan and create a strategy for dealing with your loved one's care. And that just helps immensely. Again, it goes back to malpractice. I don't know anything about geriatric care. But these people are brilliant and they know a ton of stuff and they have a ton of resources. So relying on them really, really helps create that time for me to take a step back and get my nails done or get a workout in or do all of those things. If I'm spending 5 hours a week on caring for my parents, and I can cut that down to 3 because I'm utilizing professionals to do the other 2, that makes an immeasurable difference in the quality of my life.
I love that. April.
So Amy said it, acknowledging it, admitting it, and then taking care of you. So I'm in that moment right now where I know I need time, right? I can feel it. And I'm not going to push through it. And so I'm taking Friday off, supposedly, right? I'm never off. Can you imagine the governor trying to reach me and I'm like, I'm busy, right? That can't happen. So I'm still available, but I'm always of the mindset, right? I have a work phone, I have a personal phone. If you need me, anyone who needs me, you have my personal phone. So you'll always be able to reach me. If you are sending me an email on Friday, that might not get seen until Monday, right? Because I know I'm in that moment right now where I need me time. I also have regularly, it's probably every other week, maybe it might be twice a month that I have beauty weekends, where I'm doing nails, hair, everything, right? Because looking good for me makes me feel good, right? And so that's part of my kind of escape, and where it's all about me, right? The service is to me, right? I'm being served. And so I appreciate that. And I shared with you all on our meeting that maybe a few months after my mom died, a friend of mine who I've known for 30 something years, he reached out to me, texted me and said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "I'm not good." And his response was, "But you're strong." And I responded, what if I don't want to be strong right now? And he had the best response. His response was, "Thank you. Let me help." Right. And I understood it. I was not offended. I didn't take it any way than exactly what it was. And I even read into it more that he was acknowledging that as a Black woman, we take on this trope of having to be a strong Black woman. I know my internet is going in and out. Why would it not? I'm here in this building. But like he understood the strong Black woman idea, and he didn't want to necessarily take it from me. But as soon as I released it, he was there to carry it for me. And so that then brings me again back to my village and to my community. And that's the other thing that I do is I like to spend time. I like to go out with my girlfriends. I like to hang out. I like to be able to do that. It fills me and it gets me ready for a new week in particular, a new day. It really just does something for my soul, for my joy, and to be a better me. I need what I call my family. I need my family because they are who keep me lifted and remind me of who I am as a person and that I am loved.
Beautiful. Candace and Anand, we're going to have to do it in the next minute or
sorry.
two. It's
Okay.
all right. If you're
Just
comfortable sharing.
Yeah, no, really quickly, I just wanted to say, the both what April and Amy said regarding asking for help is huge. Self-care doesn't have to be, this ornate spa day. If you can't, if it's 20 minutes, sometimes that can recharge. I put the Calm app on my phone. I know it sounds stupid, but the Calm app for 20 minutes once in a while was all I could give up in terms of time. And, the help piece is just, it can be transformative. So, don't forget to ask for help, and EAPs, if you're at a firm, employee assistance programs, they're there for you. FMLA, you can take it fractionally. So if you're having caregiving issues and FMLA is available to you, definitely look into those resources at your firm. Sorry.
That's fantastic.
Yes, I was just going to say something very similar to what Candace said. I mean, I feel like I sometimes get stressed if I try to plan self-care, because then I worry like, oh, it's like if I don't have a half an hour block or an hour block to do something, it actually stresses me out more. So finding ways to just kind of take it in small increments is helpful. And sometimes this isn't always going to be possible, but sometimes if there's a way to combine it with the other kind of care responsibilities you have, it's not always going to be possible. But I take my kids to school most days of the week. When I'm driving after I drop them off, that's 20 minutes to half an hour. When I'm in the car, I can listen to a podcast or something like that. So it's, obviously not all situations are going to be conducive to that, but I think if you can find a situation where you can combine a little bit of self-care with other caregiving roles that you're doing, is helpful.
Thank you so much. I love this group. You guys are amazing. And I know that we have a very passionate crowd of caregivers, and we anticipate lots of questions, and some of you shared questions in advance. So we want to open it up so that there's time to cover anything that you might need to hear from us.
And yes, so Leslie, thank you. I was going to say we're absolutely open to questions now. And I just wanted to chime in. I recently had to step in with my parents who were quite healthy, and recently things have taken a little bit of a downturn. But talking about boundaries, one of the things in our self-care that it's very important to me in order to do my job here at work as well as take care of them is making sure that I do have that time for myself. And we talked about it. And Amy, you had mentioned it in the mornings or the evenings. I like to do Wordle. This is my time. And I've made boundaries with my husband as well to say, you know what? This is my downtime. No talking. And I need it. I need it to be able to do what I do. And also, I don't know if this is going to sound harsh, but my mother, who is 88, but she's actually quite capable. She is homebound, but she is able to take care of things. And she asks, Amy, can you help me with returning my license plates to the RMV? And she said, you can go online and do it. And I know my mom has gone online. She's actually pretty good. And I said to her, I said, you know what? Have you tried to do that yourself? And she said, no. And I said, well, Mom, I'm more than happy to help you. If you could try it first, that would be really helpful because I am so busy. And let me know how it goes. But again, of course, if you can't do it, I will help you. And she said, you know what, Amy, you're right. I can. I haven't heard back, so I'm not quite sure if she's been successful or not. But for me, it was really setting this boundary. Yes, I can help, but you know what? I need you to try it first. She also knows that I'm dealing a lot with what's happening with my father. So again, it's setting boundaries and making that time. And again, Amy and everybody talked about is carving out that time for yourself, because if you can't take care of yourself, you cannot take care of those around you. And again, as Anand said, even if it's listening to a podcast or the Calm app, these are things to do for ourselves. And if it's 10 minutes of not talking to anybody, then hey, for me, actually, that's a great recharge. So I just wanted to chime in and share some of my own personal experiences. I am not a lawyer, just so folks know, but again, work can be quite busy. So with that, if there are any questions, again, we're more than happy. Oh, we do have a question. On the subject of alleviating guilt, what are your strategies for combating guilt, which can feel so reflexive when your decision to work, and thus to be juggling work with caregiving, is not a financial decision as much as it is a matter of wanting to pursue your own personal goals?
I love that because there are so many people for whom their identity gets subsumed into the caregiving role, that recognizing and understanding that being a member of the out-of-home workforce is an essential part of yourself is huge. The way I deal with that is I look at it in terms of, who do I want to be in 10 years? Who do I want to be in 20 years? So my kids are going to grow up and leave. My parents and in-laws, unfortunately, are going to pass at some point in time. What is there going to be left for me of who I am at the end of the day when all of those things have happened? And that is, in part, not entirely, but in part my professional self. So that's part of the way that I deal with it, is to think about, who do I want to be when those caregiving responsibilities are no longer part and parcel of my daily life?
I'm going to jump in on that with modeling back to, something I said. If Lindsay, you have children, or even if you're caregiving for older people, whether they're your parents or not, you're modeling, your skill, which is amazing to have. And if they are parents or your older loved ones, they can be proud of you. And I think we'll go back to the analogy of putting the oxygen mask yourself on a plane before you put it on other people. You are no good to anyone else unless you are, your cup is full. And I think for many of us, we're lawyers, many of us type A, this is how we feel good. We want to do good work. We take pride in that work. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So be kind to yourself and think about what you'd say to your friend if they said that to you, right? The self-talk is, can be pretty demoralizing, me anyway.
I don't know if any other questions come in. I'm going to echo that. I'll just put in really quickly just a personal story. My mother stayed at home for quite a few years, and then later we had real financial difficulties, and she felt really distraught that she had stepped away from her career. And she told my sister and I, from the time I think we were old enough to understand, never to give up our careers, and to always maintain that part of ourselves, and that it provided independence. And so I echo that if it's part of your identity and it makes you feel confident, powerful, that is part of your self-care. So no guilt needed.
Leslie, I also think that, for me at least, I have always been a better parent because of the fact that I have something outside of the home. I am not somebody who is great with my kids 24/7, 365. I'll be the first to admit it. I love them dearly, but when I was home for 6 weeks on maternity leave with my younger child, my older son probably didn't have as good of a relationship with me as he had when I was working, because I am much better at balancing my feelings around my children when I have external outlets for my passions and my emotion. So I think it's very important to recognize about ourselves who we are, what fulfills us, what makes us better people and better parents.
Excellent points.
One of the questions that was asked earlier when people were signing up was, how do you actually have that conversation? I think we talked a little bit about it with your boss. And how do you actually, because there is a power dynamic going on there. And how do you say, hey, this has really been a struggle for me, and here's what I could use? So it's, how do you ask for that help? How do you ask for that support? And again, recognizing that there is a power dynamic there.
As a professional mediator and someone who is involved in negotiations on a day in and day out basis, the best thing you can do is identify what their interests are and what your interests are, and find areas of commonality. And so it maybe is something along the lines of, hey, I know you've been noticing my work product is not as good as it can be. Here's what I think I need to deliver the work product you and our clients deserve. And if you can come up with something that is workable and tenable for them, that is not going to affect your productivity in a significant way, or if it is going to affect your productivity, is going to do so in a way where it increases. Most bosses who have the bottom line in mind are going to look at that positively. If your work is going out the door at a billable rate of X, and you're going to be able to deliver X times a certain number of hours with accommodations versus X minus without accommodations, your bosses are going to say, okay, if you're going to work 10 hours Monday through 10 hours a day Monday through Thursday and need Fridays off, and you're going to give me better work and more billable work in that time, I'm all for it.
Yeah, and I sorry. Oh, I was going to say I do think as a practical matter, because of that power imbalance, it's just the reality that you have to kind of bank some goodwill beforehand, ideally. And this is something that I tell kind of younger lawyers and law students a lot, especially. Is like, if you've demonstrated value, kind of like Amy was saying, before you have that conversation, then I think it makes it much easier to kind of walk in and say like, hey, look, you need me to do this work. Maybe I can't do as much of it right now, but I'm still gonna, bring value to the organization. The other thing I would say is kind of from my own experience, having waited too long to have this conversation at one point in the past. Like when you think you need to have this conversation, I know it's hard to kind of tear off that Band-Aid, but really just do it. Especially if you've built up that goodwill. I mean, just kind of like, from my personal experience, when I left my big law firm, I was at Latham & Watkins here in Boston, and I have nothing but good things to say about them. I kind of waited too long before I went to them and said, hey, I need an accommodation. And by the time I went to them and said, hey, I need accommodation, I was like, I was so burnt out, and my wife was so burnt out being married to a big law associate, so it was almost like too late. If I had had that conversation with the people at Latham 4 months earlier, things might have been very different. So if that's kind of like the one piece of advice I would give. If you think you need to have that conversation, don't wait, just do it.
I was going to say sort of what Anant was going to say, which is communication. I think there's an expectation that maybe there wouldn't be patience for an accommodation. So we're sort of projecting on, our bosses or the powers that be that, maybe they're okay with that. It's particularly if you've done great work and it's temporary, because it's all temporary. That's the other thing I wanted to say to everyone out there. This is all temporary. Tomorrow's a new day. Which is what we say to our kids, right? But it's true, and communication really can go a long way.
And Candace,
My
I was just
apologies.
going to say, we have another question, I think that touched upon this, is we've talked a lot about communicating with clients and bosses, but what about communicating with your children or who you caregive for when you have something that you cannot deprioritize at work?
So I was going to chime in on that. I saw that question.
Oh, okay, good.
And yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting conversation. When my child was younger, I'm not sure we really got deep into it, aside from, mommy can't be here for that right now. But see, also with my village, I always had a substitute. If I was not available, there was always a substitute who could fill in for me. Always. My son can tell you the time, I think by this time he was so used to, if someone appeared, he'd be like, oh, I must be going with that person. Right. He was such a community baby, because I had substitutes. So that's what I tried to do. I can't be there, but so-and-so, Nana's going to be there. Pop's going to be there. Or all my friends became uncle and auntie, right? They're going to be there. So lining people up to be available for that. And then he learned that it was like he was conditioned for that. And so there was one time he was in high school and he decided he was going to test his allergies. I don't know why. So he ate some nuts that he had recently learned he was allergic to. I get a call from the high school doctor who's like, we have to give him Benadryl. Can you come and pick him up? Absolutely cannot. I cannot come pick up my child. They were like, what? I cannot. I have a job. I have to be here for the job. I can, and my son was like, I know my mama is going off right now. And so he was like, can I speak with her, please? Grab the phone. And he was like, Mommy, I'm just going to call Uncle David. Thank you, son. Bye. And we got off the phone. So he also knew to call the substitute. But what that did for him is that then in caring for my mom, which we did together, but he did a lot of it because he was home more, right? Was one day I was out at I went out with friends and I was at some concert in Foxborough, and my mother was doing things that we didn't want to do, leaving the house, things of that nature, um, and trying to wander off. And my son called me, and I was like, "What's going on?" And he was like, "I just had to sit Nana down and just tell her she can't just freely leave the house because then she goes somewhere, she ends up at a hotel, the police are called, the police call you." And I had to explain to Nana, like, you can't do that. That's really hard on mommy who's trying to balance right now. And right now I'm here with you. And so let me take, so like to see the evolution of that, right? And I think Candace, you spoke about this, is that your our kids will hopefully become our caregivers, right? And we're kind of training them to become us in that nature. So I tease with my son all the time. Like, by the time I turn 50, you're gonna have to do this, that, and the other. And he's like, you're not gonna be that bad at 50, mommy, right? But just like
April, I'm gonna be 50 this year. I take offense to that.
I'm gonna be 50 next year. So, but I'm jokingly priming him to just remember, right? Because your kids don't grasp the concept that you're gonna get older, right? And my son needs to grasp that concept, that I'm gonna get older. My father had dementia, my mom had dementia, my grandmother had Alzheimer's. We have to get, like, I need you to understand that this could be a reality for you with me, is where I am. And so teaching him how to be a caregiver, and especially teaching him how to be a caregiver for me. And I'm so glad you talked about this, Candace, about making sure things are in order, right? I was my mom's power of attorney. Yep. But I did not recognize, because again, when you're in it, you don't realize things that you would definitely realize outside of it as a lawyer. The minute she died, that power of attorney died with her. And I didn't realize that. I thought I still had power, and I didn't, right? And so, my son went through that with me. My son understands this is what you're going to end up taking on, and just getting them there. So having those conversations where they see, you can't be Superwoman, and sometimes you can't be there at all places at all times with them. That doesn't mean you don't love them and support them. You do. Matter of fact, I'm sending someone on my behalf, right? And then also helping them to see how you're caring for others, including them. And so that later on, when they become the caregiver, they can be just as wonderful as you were in caring for them and caring for others.
I think that's such a great point, April. And the only other thing that I would add to that is I think we project as parents a lot of the guilt we have about not being there for our children when we think we should be. And actually, in many instances, it's healthier for them to develop exactly the kind of relationships you were just talking about, trusting relationships with other adults.
I just want to add, somebody mentioned, thank you. This was a great webinar. I just want to summarize a few points, and I'm sure I'm going to miss some, but the biggest thing is it takes a village, and you got to use the resources around you, the people you know, reach out to them. You need help. It's okay to ask for that help. And I think it's also okay, from what I understand, to let people know what you need. And also to take care of yourself. Figure out what you need for yourself and then do it. I don't think there's any magic answer that's going to take the guilt away. I think it was Amy who talked about, and others, talking to people. And that's something I'll just do a quick plug for LCL. If your law firm doesn't have an EAP, that's what we're here for. Give us a call, make an appointment with one of our 4 clinicians, and just talk. Sometimes just to get some things off your chest. But, I think there are some great strategies and tips that you all shared. and it was really a great conversation. Also, I'm going to include some information. Leslie is developing a workshop on burnout, and so I'm going to include that as well once the recording goes out. But Leslie, I'm going to let you take over. Any last words?
No, I mean, well, actually I do have one. If you don't have the psychological safety at work, because a lot of my work is with employers, not every boss is a good boss, rely on employee resource groups, affinity groups, colleagues. Sometimes strength lies in numbers. If you don't feel like you can have a conversation one-on-one with your leadership around caregiving and flexibility.
I'll just jump in really quick too and say, I have a podcast called the Sandwich Generation Survival Guide. So I have lots of these resources that are all up on the podcast so that everybody can listen to them. It's free, of course. So I welcome you to listen to it. We've talked about a lot of sandwich generation and caregiving issues on the podcast. I've had some great guests on as well. So a lot of wealth of information.
I just wanted to say really quick to follow up on Amy's point about it taking a village. I mean, that's definitely right. And for anyone on the call who may be on the younger end, who just kind of starting off this thinking, think about planning your career around that, right? You know, I kind of lucked out this way. I didn't necessarily plan it this way, but I kind of ended up in Boston, where my parents are, where my brother is, where a lot of my friends are. It's like that building a village doesn't always come naturally. You sometimes have to kind of plan your career around it. And so if you are on the younger end, kind of thinking about mapping out your career, that's something I would recommend keeping in mind.
Excellent, excellent. We have somebody else who said, thank you all. This was very helpful and informative. And I will add, thank you all. I mean, you were so fantastic, sharing your stories, the vulnerabilities, your experiences, and the advice, and how everybody has done it and how you're continuing to do it is really been wonderful. And Leslie, also a big thank you for being our moderator, asking wonderful questions, providing such great information. Your research really does sound so interesting in such a large group. And so I would encourage folks to go to her website and take a look at that. Leslie, do you want to quickly mention your website so people can go?
Yes, momshierarchyofneeds.com. Lots of great parent information, wellness app for mothers, and then lots of information for employers and organizations.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you all again. I'm sure for the caregivers out there, they need to go and take care of folks. So thank you again. It was somebody is actually saying Anand's last point about building a career around the village resonated so much with me and is such a nuanced point of view that not everyone thinks about. Thanks a lot. So great. All right. Well, thank you all. We appreciate you being here, and hopefully you got some good takeaways. Have a great night. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.